Hello, everyone, and welcome to Database Security Office Hours for March of 2019. Our topic this month is Oracle Database Vault. Database Vault is unique to the Oracle database. It's probably one of the most important security controls in your toolbox. There are an amazing number of security control objectives where you'll find the solution is Database Vault. And you'll learn that a good understanding of its capabilities is really critical to reducing the risk of security breach. There's just a lot of things you can do with Database Vault that there's no other way to do. I'm happy to tell you that joining us today, I've got Alan Williams, who is up, I believe it is 2 a.m. his time. So thank you very much for joining us this morning, Alan. And Alan is the product manager for Database Vault. Alan is also the driving force behind centrally managed users and enterprise user security within the Oracle database, as well as our data-driven security capabilities like real application security, virtual private database, and label security. And Alan is going to take us through recent innovations in Database Vault, including some of the new features in Database 19c. Just a reminder that this call is being recorded and that within a couple of days after the second call is over later today, the recordings will be available on the AskTOM page at bit.ly AskTOM-DBSec. AskTOM is, we do this every month. We do 2 sessions each second Thursday of the month just to give it a little bit better geographical coverage. And really the goal of AskTOM is for us to give you an update on technical topics, as well as let you know what has changed over the last month in terms of database security. This is your place to ask any questions you want. I'm happy to see that we've gotten a few more people that are using the pre-meeting questions within AskTOM, because if I get your questions in advance, I can do research if needed, get you an answer ahead. And if you put your email address in the question, then I can just send you the answers by email, which is convenient. We've got a couple of announcements this month. The first one is we did release Audit Vault and Database Firewall Bundle Patch 10 right towards the end of February. So depending on when you saw it, it was either the end of February or very beginning of this month. But this is our first bundle patch that builds on the BP9 baseline that we established last year. And what that means is if you're not already on bundle patch 9, you have to go to bundle patch 9 before you can apply bundle patch 10. What we see in bundle patch 10 is a much simpler patch because of that baseline. You'll find it's a lot quicker to install, a lot smaller to download. The big new things: updated support for SQL Server. We've had a lot of people waiting for support for SQL Server 2017. We're happy to have that out the door. And also support for the newer versions of Oracle Linux and Red Hat Linux, up to 7.5. For those using Host Monitor, we've updated our AIX support. We've added in support for the newer versions of Windows Server. And we had a couple of people that were asking for Solaris on x86-64. So we have included Host Monitor support for that platform. We also recently released the Database Security Assessment Tool version 2.1. The big things that you'll find in here is we've added in STIG rule highlighting. So as you're going through your configuration checks in Database Security Assessment Tool, if we find something that is applicable to the Secure Technical Implementation Guides, we will highlight that with a little oval that tells you it's STIG. We've also added new findings, things like if we've got issues with how global names is set, if we're seeing password file issues, and we'll highlight that now in the DBSat. And we've made it a little bit easier for you to tell when a system privilege was directly granted instead of coming through a role. You'll see that now marked with a D in the list of system privileges. We went ahead and certified the Database Security Assessment Tool for the Autonomous Cloud Services, so that's new this month. On the discovery, the sensitive data discovery side of DBSat, we added in language files for several of the European languages, and thanks to all of their customers that helped us test these files out. I'm not sure who all is on the call, but if you're there, thank you for helping. We've got a really significant revamp of how we're looking at sensitive data. And you'll see this carried forward not just from DBSat, but into a couple of other Oracle tools over the upcoming year. As many of you know, especially for this particular call, GDPR is driving a lot of work around knowing where your sensitive data is and how to categorize that. So it was a big focus area for us for this version of DBSAT. You'll find that we have now divided up sensitive data into categories that make just a little bit more sense. We've expanded the number of sensitive data types that we're looking for. I believe we're up to 120 of them. And we've also assigned each type a default risk level. So for example, national identifiers or payment account numbers might be high risk, whereas gender, which is still personal information, might be lower risk because you got a 50-50 chance of just guessing that one. As with everything or many things in DBSAT, the categorization and risk level is customizable by you. So you don't have to go with our categories. If you want to assign your own risk levels, that is included as a capability within the tool. And so anyway, a lot of new stuff in DBSAT. We've got a few upcoming events I want to make sure you know about. For anyone who's going to be at Open World in Singapore on the 26th to the 27th of March, we've got 3 database security sessions. One of those is inside the head of a database hacker. Another is security and OCI, core to edge protection. And the third is an introduction to our upcoming data security cloud service. I'm doing the first and the third of those, and Laurent Gill, who leads our Edge security group, is doing the second. If you're in Singapore, really would love to see you in one of these sessions. Hope to see you there. Similarly, if you're going to be at the International Oracle Users Group Conference in San Antonio from the 7th to 11th of April, we have 2 hands-on labs, and there is still space in both of those labs. And we're doing a couple of sessions, or 3 sessions there. One of those will be on privilege analysis, and Rich Evans will be handling that one. And I'll be doing unified audit and recent database security innovations that you might not know about, and would love to see you in those sessions as well. In the support corner this month, I wanted to let you know about 3 new notes. One of those is an update to the master note for database security assessment tool. Obviously, we've got a lot of new capabilities in there, and so we've updated the note that describes that. Another one is a new note on removing and disabling transparent data encryption. We've had a lot of questions around this, and so we've got a single place to go for all of those answers. And the final one is how to upgrade the Java development kit, the Java that comes with the old 12.1 Oracle Home. We've had a few questions on that. Just a quick reminder to everyone, we are recording the session, and I had someone who asked if they could record. Yes, Zoom does allow you to do that. We're recording. You're welcome to record. No problem with that. And with that, I'm going to switch us over to the technical side of things. And Alan, you should be able to take control now. And you're coming through, but it's a little garbled. You're very garbled, Alan. It's like maybe in Zoom you've got your microphone set to something that's far away from you. You might want to go to audio settings in Zoom and choose a different microphone.
How about now?
Perfect.
Better?
Yep,
okay.
Much better.
Yeah, it was on the wrong one.
Okay.
All right. Good morning or afternoon. Thank you all for joining. Talking about my favorite Oracle product, Database Vault. My name is Alan Williams, and Russ has introduced me. I've been with Oracle for about 13 years, 9 years in the field and the consulting side, working on security projects, and then found out that the product management position for Database Vault was open, so I immediately applied for that. And so that's where I've been working for the last 4 to 5 years. So want to talk about the recent innovations in Database Vault, but before that, just want to quickly go over what is Database Vault. For those of you that don't know, may not know all the controls that we have with that, at least at a high level. So it's really reducing the risk from privileged user accounts that have direct access to the database. We see encryption helps protect your data outside the database, like on your OS files and storage and backup files and such. But these control access to data for those people that have that need to have access to data, like administrators and applications and such. In many cases, the applications or users will have many privileges and generally are overprivileged. So what one of the key features for Database Vault is an enforced separation of duties for some key tasks that help minimize some of the attack vectors that we've seen attackers use. And we protect sensitive data by adding something called a realm around objects like tables, views, or entire schemas. And that'll block access by people using any of the system privileges like select any. We can also manage database change. And for production databases, there are a lot of different changes, dropping tables, changing the structure of the database that doesn't need to be done outside of maintenance hours. And so those can be controlled using Database Vault. And these can be done underneath the application with either minimal or no impact to applications and performance, and works automatically, since this is part of the database, with Oracle database enterprise architectures, like with high availability and with data guard options. And there's generally, due to separation of duty, there's some impact to operations, and that's to help enforce the good security practice for separation of duty. Okay, so a little bit more detail on that, on some of these controls. Protecting the data from privileged users. I have these select any tables from accessing realm protected data. And we use something called trusted path, or maybe you're familiar with another term, context-based security, where the realm protection also comes with some conditions saying, well, if we'll only accept a connection if it's from this IP address or from this particular client, from this particular program. And this prevents certain highly privileged applications, which also have either administrative or system privileges, from accessing data in other protected realms. And that same database, the trusted paths can be applied to changes. For example, a DBA would be able to make changes to the system, but only during work hours and only during from local IPs instead of from VPN. So these are the type of trust that we can create for accessing, for the conditions that we can set to access sensitive data and make changes to the database. So let's take a look at what we've done since 12.1. We're not going to go over every change. These are more the big innovations that move the product forward versus things like manageability changes. And then we'll go into 4 particular functions or features that we've introduced in a little bit more detail. So let's start with the 12C or 12.102, which includes the 12.101 release. The big things that were released with that is mandatory realms and privilege analysis. And we'll actually touch on both those. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time. Mandatory realms is in addition to the now what we call regular realms. that were part of Database Vault since the beginning. And it gives you a lot more stronger controls on who has access to sensitive data. And privilege analysis, it was a separate tool. It allows you to do dynamic analysis to help you with least privileges and tells you what privileges and roles a user or application, a DBA actually used and didn't use over a period of time. And that was the separate tool is licensed with Database Vault, but as many of you know, that is now available as part of Enterprise Edition for the database. So now you don't need to have Database Vault to run privilege analysis. Now with Database Vault 12.201, we introduced something called Database Vault policies to help delegate and do management of groups of Database Vault controls. And again, I'll have a slide on that, as well as some slides on my favorite feature for this group called simulation mode. That's a very powerful tool to help you quickly adopt Database Vault controls safely. Then with Database Vault 18c, not some big things, but we made some interesting enhancements to the simulation mode to make it a little bit easier to read and use. And I'm going into a little bit more detail since this is a little bit more recent. We're also able to grant the Database Vault authorizations to roles, not just users. Before 18c, you could only say, well, you're allowed to export this data, but now it's only granted to a user. Now, as most enterprises need, it's now granted roles. And 19c, which is released on the Exadata platforms and some cloud platforms, and will be rolling out to on-premises later this year. We've had two main changes for that. One is to be able to do command rule support. Command rules, again, is to be able to manage the SQL commands that you can run. And now with Unified Audit, you can enable and disable, control the enabling and disabling of individual policies and attach rule sets to that. So you can specify who has control of being able to do that. So you can refine it with separation of duty and also with the other rules that you have for trusted factors like time of day to be able to enable or disable Unified Audit policies. And the big one for Database Vault 19c is operations control. We'll have a number of slides on that, but in fact, it's a way to help, again, separate out control and access of data, of customer data from an infrastructure DBA point of view. So I'll just jump right into this and talk about mandatory realms. A lot of times it's like, well, what's the difference of mandatory and regular realms? And why should what reason should I choose one or the other? Mandatory realms, only the authorized users, which are the users that have been authorized or added to the realm as an authorized owner or participant, are allowed to access objects protected by that mandatory realm. And in addition to having that needing this privilege, you also need to have the normal, like some sort of system or direct object grant to be able to access that data. Now, with regular realm, if you're the schema owner, let's say the HR schema, HR automatically had access to that, even though it had been protected by Database Vault realm, which made sense. You're the owner of that realm, so you should have access to it. But you could also give direct object grants to tables and other objects within there to other users. And those people would also have access since HR granted them access, they should have access. And what you're doing is you're protecting the access to the objects that are protected by the regular realm from system privileges, people with the select any type privilege. Mandatory realm gives a lot more control over who has access, not to the owner of the schema, but to the security owner, the Database Vault security owner. And so they would have to provide access, even for HR, to access HR schemas. That has to be added as an authorized user. So no one is, if there's nobody in the authorized list on the particular realm, no one has access to the mandatory realm. It's a very powerful control. And my personal preference is use mandatory as a first choice, unless there's some constraints or design choices that that say that regular realms are a better choice. Mandatory, from a security perspective, from auditing and such, it's just a much easier way to understand who has access, who doesn't have access. Okay, and creating mandatory realm, relatively easy. It's just a part of the create realm SQL. You can see the realm type and use numbers for the options. So 1 is indicates the mandatory realm, 0 indicates the regular realm. So you have a relatively easy way of setting this up. Now, and this doesn't come up all that often, but we do see questions on this. So I just want to cover this quickly. Multiple realms. You can have multiple realms covering or protecting the same object. And here in this particular case, I've got a object, a table, that's protected by a mandatory realm and a regular realm. When you have multiple mandatory realms protecting an object, and an SQL tries to access, an SQL statement attempts to access that data, that protected data, all conditions in all mandatory realms must be met. That means you must be able to pass through every mandatory realm to access that data. If you have multiple regular realms that are protecting that data, you only need to satisfy the conditions for one of the realms to access the data. So it's, in fact, it's like an and or conditions to access the data. And that could also have bearing on what type of protection, whether you choose mandatory or regular realms. Now, if you have a mix of mandatory and regular realms, the criteria is that all mandatory realm criteria must be met to access the data. And when you have a mix of mandatory and regular realms, the regular realms almost don't matter. In fact, they don't matter. It's just the mandatory realms rules have to be met to be able to access the data. All right, and we're just a little commercial for privilege analysis. Privilege analysis, as I said, is not part of Database Vault anymore, but is now part of Database Enterprise Edition. This is a key security analysis tool that we feel all customers should have. And it's not, and we said it's not part of Database Vault, so you don't have to enable Database Vault to use it. And this goes back from 12C R1 all the way to 19. It's just a licensing change. There's no technical changes, no patches you have to include to do this. So privilege analysis, from my perspective, privilege analysis goes hand in hand with the database security assessment tool. You do a database security assessment tool to understand the security configuration in your database. It'll do some user analysis, but that's a static analysis of privileges and roles that are granted to the user. Privilege analysis is a dynamic tool, so you run it for a period of time to see what privileges and roles users, privileged users, database administrators, and applications, and any of the user, and what they actually used and what they didn't use. It's a start to help you analyze and remove privileges and roles that aren't required. And this is, again, my soapbox here. It's a great way to stop using that out-of-the-box DBA role. That out-of-the-box DBA role that Oracle provides. It's a the kitchen sink. It's got everything in there. It's got every system privilege. It's got everything. It's all too powerful. It's more of a tool for some of the Oracle functions and products. From a customer perspective, we should be looking at creating custom DBA roles. And before it was really hard. Well, how do I know what roles and privileges they need? Well, you use privilege analysis. Privilege analysis will help you understand and create custom roles for groups of DBAs or single DBAs, depending on your SOD type of situation. All right, next, feature I want to talk about is database vault policy. This is something that was introduced in 12.2, and this allows you to manage a group of database vault security objects. More importantly, it helps you delegate some of that responsibility. The DV owner or the DV admin is a very powerful role within database vault. It allows you to manipulate and change, enable and disable all the controls in database vault. So there may be some cases where you want to assign the ability to make changes, but only to a small group of controls to another person, to a security officer, and let's say the HR group that understands, or the HR IT group that understands the controls and the business needs of that unit, without having to give out the DV owner or the DV admin privilege. So a database vault policy is something that's created by the database vault owner, and then command rules and realms are added to that, and then the policy is delegated, or a policy owner is added to the policy to manage manage the policy as a whole. And when that policy owner can't do everything DV owner can do. In fact, at the policy level, what it does is it can add and remove realm authorized users to the realms within the policy. It can enable and disable all the included database vault controls, and it's also adding simulation mode. That's one of the modes it can be in. And you can view the dictionary information on the included database vault controls. So it's a very, again, it's an SOD, separation of duty type feature, allowing you to delegate responsibility without having to give out the all-powerful database vault owner or the database vault admin role to other people. And here's an example of creating a database vault policy. And you can see that this policy, it's enabled, which means all the controls within that policy are going to be enabled. And this PL SQL stack, that's actually that's a part of this enhancement that we had later on in 18, and I'll be talking about that a little bit later on. So then, now we come to simulation mode. Simulation mode is my favorite feature for database vault. It takes a lot of the objections about using simulation, about using database vault that customers had. Some of the objections that are brought up on using simulation mode as well. I'm afraid of breaking applications. This is a very powerful prevention tool, and when you move this into production, all of a sudden all these controls are enabled, and yeah, you did all that testing ahead of time, but you're always kind of there's always a pucker factor coming in when you introduce simulation mode into production. Make sure everything is working as it should be. So simulation mode was created to reduce risk when deploying the database vault controls in production or adding new controls in production. Also help in reducing time, effort, when your applications always need to be certified with database vault enabled applications. And this is true for Oracle applications within Oracle when they're certifying against a database or the Oracle database, as well as customers with their custom applications on the database. But simulation mode means that realms and command rules it can be put into simulation mode. It's another mode like enabled or disabled, but it actually there's another one called simulation mode now. And what it does is it'll evaluate the security controls in that SQL is executing, just like it does in when the command rule or realm is enabled. But when something happens, it's only the violations are logged. It doesn't actually block the SQL. So the SQL will operate as normal, but it'll log the violation. So again, it does not block the SQL. So some of the cases, again, see quickly certifying applications with Database Vault. And it simulates the new controls. Let's say a new command role that you're introducing, and you tested it in the test environment, but now you want to roll out in production. So what you do is, instead of just creating the command rule with a script, you put it in simulation mode, and you run it for a period of time, 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, to see what the impact is. And let's take a look at the simulation log. The simulation log is empty. That means there are no violations. But if it does have things, then you started saying, well, why did that have to run? Or should that have been blocked? And so those are the type of questions that you can answer before you say, okay, I'm comfortable with this new control. I'm going to now enable it from the simulation mode to enabled mode. And that's also something you can also look at to help you create Database Vault security control configurations during development tests. Instead of doing analysis, you can use this to make it easy for yourself to create these control parameters. I saw a question is available in the AWS cloud. Oh, okay. All right, you got that, Russ. All right, let me just keep on with the presentation. So let's talk about application certification. When you create controls to protect, let's say, HR information, the HR application needs to be certified to make sure it still works, since you're blocking access to the HR data, and you got to make sure that the right users and the right conditions, if you have trusted path information, if that's all set up correctly. Past, you've analyzed the application, the architecture, you create the controls, you test the application, you analyze any errors. And in many cases, you have to update the security controls or run the regression test again. In these cases, this is where I hear from the DBAs here from the application team. We don't like Database Vault. It breaks our application. And so the DBAs get very sensitive. So, well, I don't want to do Database Vault. The application folks always complain to me. So with simulation mode, you get to reduce the upfront analysis, and you get to reduce these cycles of going back and forth between analyzing and updating security controls. By using the simulation mode and capturing the information in simulation log, so you can run, because it doesn't block SQL. You can, from the application developer's point of view, they're running the entire regression script. If they're finding errors, that's their errors. It's not from Database Vault blocking things. And you can look at the simulation log to see if there's anything that has to be updated. And you can rerun the entire regression test, but it's a much quicker. You're not sitting there analyzing what happened in the middle of if the regression test fails in the middle of it. So you're able to run the entire regression test and analyze it and maybe make some updates. And that allows you to certify that application with Database Vault and remove this cycle that goes on that gives the appearance that Database Vault breaks an application. And this is the interesting use case, trying to understand, without a whole lot of in-depth analysis about what you may need to do for a new application with Database Vault. What you do is, during development, you put in a simulation mode, a realm around, let's say, the HR schema, and you make that a mandatory realm, but in simulation mode with no authorized users. So what you're doing is you're trying to capture all the users that need access to that as you're going through development. Oh, sorry. And you also create some command rules on alter system, alter session, create directory to try to understand the controls that you need for the database. When you take a look at that, you'll find different applications in a simulation log that need access to it during the integrated testing, the functional testing. HR app obviously needs access to the HR data, so that makes sense from the user. BI tool, that's something that may have missed the initial analysis, saying, okay, well, the BI tool also accesses that information. So that has to be included in the realm rules. And then when you go into production testing, you can see if some the command rules that you want to apply and see if there's any changes that you need to make with that for your development operations activities. And you still, even if you've done all this work in development, testing, production test, even when you go into production, there's still some use for simulation mode. Again, it's to reduce risk for when you move these things into production, but also is to help understand the trusted path. The trusted path, these context-based access rules, those aren't fully formed until you get into the production, because IPs, so things like IP numbers will change. So you want to save the full analysis for the trusted path factors until you do it in production. And you can see things like, well, okay, IP address, client information, what they have accessed, and be able to update information for your trusted path, your rule sets, and rule sets for the access to access the sensitive data. You can do that all through simulation mode. And once you update those rules and you keep reviewing the simulation log to see if there's any new violations that come in, and once you feel comfortable with that, you can fully enable Database Vault in production. So it's not just a binary switch anymore, where you just drop in the new controls fully enabled. You can put them in simulation mode and ease your way into it, giving everyone a feeling confidence in Database Vault by the time you turn on the enable it completely. And this just shows you the Enterprise Manager allows you to control it, as well as the APIs that we have. HR Realm again, it's a status, it's a state that you set, either enabled, disabled, or simulation mode. In a simulation log, while you look at the information that you can pull the information from the API in the simulation log, also look at it easily in Enterprise Manager. It organizes a nice, easy way to see who the user was that executed the command, what kind of command it was, and it was a realm violation or command violation, what the realm name that the violation occurred with, who owns it, and actually the SQL text, so you can try to better understand what was run against that. Okay, I'll jump into 18C. 18C, this is when we started the new numbering system for the database. This is actually supposed to be a patch set, like 12, original numbers was 12.202. So it really was had some minimal set of, it wasn't a big release. And so we had some enhancements for simulation mode. And this is, but there's some interesting ones in here. In the past, before you can see with the original simulation mode, when you ran situations where you had multiple mandatory realms, it would only record the first mandatory realms that triggered the violation and didn't allow you to access. Remember what I said before about if you have multiple mandatory realms that protect the same object, you have to be able to get through all the mandatory realms to access the object. If you violate even one mandatory realm, you're not going to access the object. So the simulation mode actually simulated that. It says, oh, as long as I pick up one of them, it's okay. But really, the use case for simulation mode is that you want to understand all the impacts to the object. You know, if you're violating, if there's 6 mandatory realms and you're violating all 6 of them, you want to know that ahead of time, because let's say you fixed one of them, mandatory realms, and you reran the regression test, you ran into the second mandatory realm. So now all mandatory realm violations are recorded in the simulation log, so you can fix, if you need to, you can update those realms to allow that access. Again, it simplifies the number of runs you have to do to get that working. Captures the full call stack information. A lot of times they'll tell you which SQL command triggered the event, but that SQL command could have been run, or is very common, it could be run from multiple different procedures and such, and different parts of the application. So if you turn on full call stack as part of the simulation mode, it'll actually pull the entire call stack, so you can understand exactly where that call came from. Now, in the past, when simulation mode, all the trusted path information, the things that it sees, the client information, the IP address, the username, everything you can pick up in for trusted path, that was all put into a single column in a name value pair string. And so it was really difficult to, when you look at that column, to pull out the information saying, well, I mean, it's a jumble of things, and I'm trying to order it, but you have to parse it out yourself to be able to pull this information. So what we did is we took the most common things that people generally create trusted path context on, things like IP and client name, and put them in the columns in the table. So you don't have to parse the string, so we make it easier to read. All right, so that's simulation one. That was my favorite one. This one is actually a very powerful new control that we were introducing in 19C, operations control, meant for multi-tenant databases. Now, as soon as multi-tenant database came out with 12C, I've had mostly larger customers and projects ask about, well, the way we're set is that individual business units in our either government organization or own the actual data in the individual pluggable databases. That's their data, while the IT department manages the database through the CDB core, the infrastructure database, and do the patching and such from the core. They should not have access to the customer data in the PDBs. So that was a request we've gotten from a number of customers when multi-tenant came out, and thought the database vault should have some role in that. With the advent of multi-tenant in the cloud, where customers have access to PDBs, or they buy PDBs and use them, and you may have different customers or different business units, again, using different PDBs in the cloud. The same thought comes up. The cloud operations, people that manage that, like an autonomous database or things like that, shouldn't be able to see customer data. So that requirement came up as well. And we were looking at how to do that with Database Vault. We came up with a concept called operations control, which in effect blocks the common user access, because the users in doing the infrastructure management in the CDB core, they're called common users. They usually preface with a C## or some other prefix to denote that they are common users. And we can block access to the PDB local data, transparent to the PDB user having to take any action on their own. Again, this is security by default, so that customers don't have to take any specific actions to make sure that they are secure. So before 19C, how would this be done on multi-tenant architecture? Well, to protect the customer data, you'd have to first enable Database Vault in the CDB root. That's fine. But then all the customers, say 200 customers, have to enable Database Vault in all their PDBs, and they'd have to have control over that, so they would be able to enable and disable and create controls and such on their own PDBs. Then you have to configure a realm, create a realm to protect all your sensitive data, actually all your data, because the infrastructure DBA shouldn't see any of the customer data, whether it's sensitive or not. Once you do that, well, what if you create a new schema? It's not automatically added to that default realm, so you have to have some way of automatically adding new schemas to that default realm. Customers, whether they wanted to or not, they would have, because Database Vault is enabled, they'd have to adapt the separation of duty that's enforced by Database Vault, and may need to change your existing processes of, especially around creating users and providing authorizations to users. And if customers were using Database Vault, they may need to be redesigned because you have a new realm that's been included to block access to all the data in the PDBs. And of course, you have some customers, because they have control over the Database Vault, they may turn off Database Vault, or they may never have turned it on in the first place in the PDB. So then all of a sudden, the Cloud Ops does have access to the data, sensitive or not, in that PDB. So this is definitely not the definition of transparency from a customer perspective. This is what we had before, and we also have to monitor it and make sure that the database vault is enabled and such. So there's a lot of overhead with that. So how does 19C operations control work? In this way, the database vault again is enabled in the database vault root, in the CDB root for the multi-tenant. And remember that database vault is run using separation of duties. So DBAs don't have the ability to turn on and off database vault. That has to be done by the security officer, and that can be managed very tightly controlled through privileged access management systems as well in a separate process. Then at the root level, the database vault operations control is enabled. This isn't the realm. This is the new control that blocks. It's just actually a simple check that's done to block common user access to local data in the PDBs. And the reason I've got this separation line in the middle of the PDBs is that in the PDBs there are some common user metadata that's available in there as well. What it does is any common user is blocked from accessing local PDB data. Customers, and this is all without enabling or disabling Database Vault in the PDBs. Customers can enable and disable Database Vault in their own PDB. They don't have to enable Database Vault in the PDB for this to work. They can use it if they want, or keep it disabled. There's no impact. The enabling Database Vault is controlled from the CDB root layer by the security officer. Now, there are some exceptions that can be allowed. Customers that may have this, or it could be some Oracle functions where you need to have a common user access, like MDSys may need access to local data, and so you would allow that in this particular instance. Or you could actually, instead of allowing an entire schema like MDSys to access, you'd only allow the procedures to access the PDB data to do work on them. And for troubleshooting purposes, you can enable the ops control or disable it for a particular PDB, and then enable it again once the troubleshooting is done. So you don't have to drop ops control for the entire multi-tenant for every PDB. You can do it on a per PDB basis and then re-enable it again. So some of you may be aware of something called a PDB lockdown profile. And this works in complement with that. The design center for the lockdown is to prevent a PDB user from impacting other PDBs in the operation of the database. I think a slide here that describes that a little bit. So lockdown prevents a PDB user from impacting the database infrastructure operations, your cloud operations, or your IT infrastructure DBAs. Also prevents you from impacting other PDBs that could belong to other business users or other customers. Whereas Database Vault prevents the database infrastructure or the cloud operations people from being able to see customer data. So it's a very good complementary technology to improve security in multi-tenant infrastructure. So this is a new use case for on-premises customers, but it's also very compelling in the cloud use case. It allows, again, transparently protects cloud admins from accessing PDB data, and As different cloud operations managed services, Oracle, they moved to 19C. You'll see more adoption of this strong control within the Oracle Cloud to prevent Oracle Cloud operations from seeing customer data. No special thing has to be done by the PDB customer. It's automatically turned on if this is a feature for that database cloud service, and no special SOD process required for PDB unless they want to implement database vault. And it's also allows for simpler, faster database vault implementation. A lot of times we get questions from customers, hey, what can we do to just quickly get some protection from database vault? And if you're working in a multi-tenant environment, normally we say, okay, add this realm and do some, just around the sensitive data, add authorized users. That's a quick win. But this is actually even simpler. You can block your IT users, the IT administrators, from accessing the PDB local data. And that's even a quicker way to start with your database vault implementation. All right, that wraps up the presentation, and I'll be happy to take questions. I'll turn it back to you, Russ.
Thanks, Alan. We had a couple of questions come in on chat, and I answered them on chat, but just because we do record this and I want to get them into the recording. Srikanth asked, I got to get back up to the question. Hang on. Is Oracle database, is Audit Vault, I'm sorry, Database Vault available in the AWS cloud? And Alan, the answer I gave was it depends on which AWS service you're using. If it's RDS, they don't allow it because it interferes with their ability to manage your database. They've decided they don't want to set up that separation of duties. If you're using EC2, that's infrastructure as a service, and you have complete control of your database, so they do allow it. Does that match your understanding?
Yeah, basically, if you have SIS access to SIS and the OS root underneath it, or actually the OS Oracle underneath it, then you can use Database Vault. If you don't, then you really don't have that unless they provide the additional tooling, and that's the difference between the RDS and the EC2. It's kind of managed services versus an IaaS service.
Makes sense. And Cristiano asked, is simulation mode enabled at the policy level? And the answer I gave is, yes, it's enabled at the policy level. You can have some policies that are enforcing, others simulating.
Well, yeah, we have a partial mode at the policy level, so it allows you to have controls at different modes inside it. You can have it all enabled, all disabled, or all simulation, or partial, which means you'll be in mixed mode at the policy level.
All right, thanks. And that was all the questions we had in on chat. We've got a little bit more time for questions, so feel free to enter them in chat, or you're welcome to unmute yourself and just ask the question verbally if you want. While we're waiting for that, just a quick update. Next office hours will be Thursday, the 11th of April. And our topic is scheduled to be discovering and masking sensitive data. And in this, we'll be talking about ways to find where your sensitive data is located. There's a couple of tools we give you for that. We'll also be talking a little bit about techniques you can use to remove sensitive data and replace it with non-sensitive data.
Hey, Russ?
Yes?
Can I mention about the Database Vault presentation by customer at OpenWorld this last year?
Sure.
And so Wells Fargo did a great presentation. They put Database Vault on every single one of their 10,000 databases, and they talked about it actually at the last 2 OpenWorlds. So their session slides are available if you're interested in kind of seeing what they did, their lessons learned of rolling out Database Vault to 10,000 databases. They bit the bullet and they did encryption and Database Vault. It's a great story for Database Vault if you want to take a look at it from a large bank perspective there.
And I haven't had a chance to tell you yet what they're submitting for this year. I talked with them yesterday about it. You're going to like it.
Oh, fantastic! Great.
So but I don't want to steal thunder. We did have another question come in on chat, and I don't know the answer to this one. Srikanth asked, are there any documentations for hands-on on Database Vault? Do you know if we have any Oracle by examples or learning library on Database Vault?
I mean, there may be. I haven't been keeping those up to date as much as putting in examples and tutorials in the documentation itself. I spend a lot of time on the documentation with our doc writer, and so new features and such usually have a tutorial section in Database Vault documentation. So please take a look at that. That does talk about a lot of the features within a tutorial concept.
Okay. Srikanth, if you don't spot that, send me an email and I'll get you a link to it. My email's at the bottom of the screen that's showing now. We did have a couple come in over chat while you were presenting. One was from Judd Williford with Hub City Media, who says,
"Hey, Judd.
Can we run privilege analysis on 12.1 databases without Database Vault now? Does this require a particular PSU or RU? My answer was, yes, you can run it on 12.1 without a Database Vault license, no particular patch required.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that. But yeah, database privilege analysis was built at the same time as Database Vault, but it was built separately from that because there was no packaging decision until the very end, and it really was just a licensing change. So yeah, no patch changes, and you don't have to enable or disable Database Vault to get PA to work. Completely separate tools.
And the other is from Jim Blazek, who asked, should there be a group of individuals or one person that have access to the DV owner in a company with 400 databases? And my answer, Jim, was it's one of those it depends questions. It depends on whether you're using Database Vault 4. If you're doing it for trusted path enforcement and that's all you care about, every DBA might control their own Database Vault. If you're using Database Vault to reduce privileged access to data, then you'd want a smaller, more focused group. And then I added, because I knew you were going to, it's never one person, always at least two. And Alan will tell you to create a named DV owner users and put the master DV owner account into a PAM system.
Yeah, and because you could have emergencies that require you to break glass and access information, and we found that some customers, large institutions, have teams of Database Vault, at least 4 or 5 people for any particular set of database. They manage a number of databases, but it gives them the ability to carry a pager. So if something happens over a weekend night, somebody is responsible to react to it and be able to give authorization.
And that was it for chat. Guys, we have a few more minutes. If there's any questions, please feel free to enter them into chat, or you can unmute yourself and just ask via voice.
Russ, with the Audit Vault, when you unpair, is there a future enhancement to be able to repair the two to kind of like pick up from where it left off?
There's not right now, Jim. As I think you're aware, we're doing a lot of work with Key Vault around that, how the high availability works. But with Audit Vault, that secondary really is just in case something terrible goes wrong, you can fail over to it. And we know that pairing can take a while, especially with a large database. But so far, there's been no real critical issues with the current architecture, at least none that we've been told about.
Okay.
And I should have mentioned, thank you, you're not just limited to Database Vault and enterprise user security and real application security. Anything database security is fair game. All right. Just in case, do want to let you know next office hours will be on Thursday, the 11th of April. That's the same day as the last day of Collaborate, and it also happens to be International Louie Louie Day. So please join us on the 11th of April, and our topic is going to be discovering and masking sensitive data.